Today I want to talk about the story of Jane Eyre, the masterpiece of the novelist Charlotte Brontë. Charlotte was born the 21st of April in 1816 in Torham, Yorkshire. She was the third child of the parish priest Patrick Brontë. In later years were born the other sisters, Emily in 1818 and Anne in 1820. All of the three will have become among the most influential novelists of the time. In the same year, the Brontes moved to Haworth, where their mother died due to a cancer, and the children were entrusted by their maternal aunt Elizabeth, who moved to their house. In 1824, Charlotte and Emily started their studies at Cowan's Bridge School, like their old sisters. But when they died prematurely, Charlotte and Emily were withdrawn from the school and continued their studies at home. Thanks to the financial help from her maternal grandmother, Charlotte was enrolled in Roe Head School in 1831. Despite a nervous start due to her shyness and gaps in her education at home, she stood out as one of the best students. Next year, she left the Roe Head School, and she came back in 1835, working as a teacher, and this position allowed her to enroll Emily free of charge to Roe Head, which unfortunately failed to adapt to the life of the school, strongly structured by the rules, and the following year she will be replaced by Anne. A few years later, Charlotte left her position as teacher due to a nervous illness and found employment as a housekeeper, but at the same time she suffered from being distanced from her sisters, and so with them began the plan to opening a school in Haworth. The goal failed and forced her into a period of discouragement until one day when she randomly found some poems written by Emily and decided to commit to their publication. The literary project also involved the other sister who decided together to create a collection. The manuscript was published in 1846 under the pseudonyms of Currer Ellis and Acton Bell. Thanks to the early success, they proposed for the publication of the novels they wrote during the year. Emily's Wuthering Heights and Agnes Grey will be published, and Charlotte presented Jane Eyre, which immediately was given to print, receiving excellent reviews. In 1854, Charlotte married the Reverend Nicholas, curate of Haworth. She died expecting a child the 31st of March in 1855 and was buried in Haworth Cemetery alongside her sister Emily. The plot of Charlotte Bronte's novel is all about the rough life of Jane Eyre, whose character embodies all the ideals of the independent and determined heroine of the time and describes the difficulties and the contradiction of the middle class of the Victorian age. Jane, orphaned and placed under the questionable care of her own Miss Reed, who made her feel like a burden in her house. Despite her age, Jane revealed a strong and resilient attitude. In fact, she rebelled against bullying from her cousins and injustice from her aunt. Her strength of will leads her to find refuge at the Wood Institute. However, even here, life is not easy and she faces difficult moments, such as the death of some of her friends. After finishing her studies, Jane remained to the Institute as a teacher, but later moved to Thornfield Hall, owned by the Rochester family, working as governess of Adele, the adopted daughter of the proprietor, Mr. Rochester. The character is illustrated by the Bronte as a man with mysterious personality hiding unspeakable secret from his past, the classic Byronic hero. Starting from here, the novel will tend to focus on the tormented love between Jane and Mr. Rochester. They fall in love rather quickly and intensely, but with a slightly later courtship due to her rebellious spirits and his look kind of surly. Their love story seemed to have a happy ending, but during the day of their wedding, Jane finally found out the secret that harasses the man she loves. Mr. Rochester is already married with Bertha Mason, who has always lived and hidden and locked up in Thornfield Old due to a form of delirious madness. This is a typical aspect of the Victorian age that saw mental illness as a shame to be hidden and forgotten. Jane, now disappointed, flees Thornfield and finds another refuge with John Rivers, a clergyman who lived with his sister. Moreover, she turns out to find unemployment and returns to practice as a teacher in a local rural school. Jane therefore tries to forget her past with Mr. Rochester, as she seems to have found some peace in her life. Suddenly, something seems to bring her down when Mr. Rivers asks her to marry him, and Jane, under a nervous breakdown, decides to run away to Thornfield Hall. The only place that, despite the last scenarios, had made her feel at home and safe is now in ruins, almost completely destroyed by fire. Mr. Rochester's first wife, Bertha, had set it on fire during one night, eventually throwing herself into flames. Even Mr. Rochester is now disfigured by wounds and scars, somewhat like his dueling, blind and mutilated. When they find each other again, they realize that they never stop loving each other, and they finally get married and have a son. Mr. Rochester will regain sight in one eye at the birth of his son. The most recent film inspired by Charlotte Bronte's novel is the 2011 film directed by Cary Fukunaga. It has the title of the same name. Fukunaga doesn't follow the chronological order of the novel. In fact, the childhood story of Jane is almost entirely skipped along with several characters. The only scene connecting to her past is when Jane returns to the Reeds to see her aunt now dying, and she grants her forgiveness. So the movie is more about the love story and the visual aesthetic that lets the viewer immerse itself in a kind gothic Victorian atmosphere, thanks to the framing and almost gloomy brightness of many scenes. Generally, the language is quite modernized and therefore goes to betray a bit the literary patterns, as the dialogues are rather sparse.